Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to hear me out on a subject which is close to my heart and ought to be close to you, because we are eyewitnesses to World War II and the greatest tragedy that had occurred during that war, that is referred to as the Holocaust. And I am one of the eyewitnesses. And at the age of 95 now, where I was only 16 years old, there are very few of us left to be eyewitnesses and to tell you what it was like. And it is very important to you to know, because if you do not know history, these things are likely to happen again. Now, who am I? My name is Alexander B. White. The B, which is my middle initial now, is my former name, which is a Polish name, stands for Biały Włos. If any of you know a Slavic language, will know that means white hair. Now, in America, I abbreviated it to white without the hair, because I'm getting white and I'm losing hair. So here I am. And I'm a retired physician who lived and practiced in this area here in Chicago for about almost 50 years. Taught at the medical school and practiced all the way in the southern suburbs. And now, at the age of 75, I moved to where it's warmer than you had it here with the snow a day ago. And here I am. Now, what do I expect to accomplish here? Let me tell it to you in the form of a caricatura that I had seen a number of years ago in one of the illustrated papers here in Chicago by Ed Wiley, a known caricaturist, who showed an old man, just about an individual of my age, sitting on a bench in the park without his jacket and a short-sleeved shirt. It was a hot day. And a little boy sits on the same bench, and he looks at the forearm of this old man, and he sees an awful tattoo there on the forearm. And he says to him, "Sir, can I ask you a question? What is this awful stuff you have on your forearm?" He said, "If you come closer, I will tell you." And the kid came closer, and he showed him, "You see, this was done to me when I was your age by evil people who have murdered my family, and by God's grace, I survived. I would have been the victim as well." So the youngster tells the man, "I can see why you want to preserve it, to remind you that there are evil people in this world that can do these things." He said, "No, not to remind me, but to remind you. And that's why I'm here, to remind you. I don't need reminding. I have to live with it every day and every night. That's why I'm here." Now, that said, Les told me I should make it very brief, because you have classes and so on, so I'm going to make it very brief. Now, my own odyssey through those 5 years of Nazi occupation, starting September 1st, 1939, when I was awakened early in the morning. It was around 5 o'clock or so, and I hear bombing in my town. And I come from a very small town, south in Poland, on the border of Poland and Czechoslovakia, because the Czech and Slovakia were one country at the time. Now they have broken up, and it's Slovakia separately and Czech Republic separately. We were a family of 6. My 2 parents, who were in the early 40s and early 50s, respectively, my mom and my dad, and 4 of us children. A sister of mine was 1 year older than I. A brother of mine was 2 years younger. He was 14 in 1939. And the youngest was 8. Of all of us 6, I am the only survivor. 90% were murdered. None died a normal death. All of them were brutally murdered by the Nazis. And that's why I think it's very important for you to know about it, and not only for you to know, but for you to tell it to your children and your grandchildren, that you have to watch out that this not happen again. Now, did it have to happen? No. It could have been easily avoided. So why did it happen? Now, I am not a researcher. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a historian. I'm just a country doctor. But so I like it simple. The simple answer is indifference. That indifference extended over all people in Germany. Germans are not murderers as such. Even extends to the US, where President Roosevelt wouldn't even admit 800 people that managed to escape Germany, but they were Jewish, and came to the shores of the United States, but of course no one else wanted them. No one else wanted immigrants, because it was a world depression, and there was lots of unemployment. Nobody wanted them, and they were sent back. And most of them perished as they were sent back, except for a few that England admitted, France admitted some, Holland admitted some, Belgium admitted some, but when Hitler invaded the West, they fell victim to the Nazism. Okay. So now I am awakened September 1st, 1939. I hear bombing, and we know that German troops invaded Poland massively, huge armies, and Poland was unprepared for war because it was barely 20 years since World War I, a horrible war where millions of people died really for nothing. So no one was prepared. But Hitler, when he took over January 30th, 1933, immediately started arming, got rid of the provisions of the Versailles Treaty which restricted him, where he couldn't have a heavy industry, he couldn't build ships and tanks and war equipment, but he defied all this and built it all, and the entire world remained indifferent to it. They protested weekly, but no one was ready to go to war again after World War I. So he marched in to the Rhineland that he wasn't supposed to, because it was on French administration, under French administration. He wasn't supposed to march into Austria, his country of birth, but he marched in there and then went after the Czech Republic. He wanted Sudetenland, the western part of Czechoslovakia, which bordered on Bavaria, Germany, marched in there, and the Allies, which is the French and the British, just let him do it, because he promised that that's it. From that point on, there's going to be peace on earth. Well, it wasn't, because less than a year later, he went after Poland, my country of birth. He wanted the western part of Poland. He wanted Poland's access to the Baltic Sea, because those areas along the borders had a reasonable number of ethnic Germans. So he wanted it, and Poland wouldn't give it to him. And the French and the British promised Poland that should they be attacked by the Nazis, the Allies, the French and the British, will attack Germany in the West, forcing Hitler to fight a two-front war. But that was not to happen. They did not do it, and he ran rapidly through Poland. My first experience of mass murder came only a few days after German troops entered the little town that we managed to escape to. People were escaping eastward, hoping that along the Vistula River, which is the river which traverses Poland from the south here via Krakow all the way, see here the Vistula River. They thought that Hitler attacked Poland from here, and that the French and the British are going to attack them and force them to fight a two-front war. And a two-front war, history told Germans as well, they can never win. But the French and the British were not prepared to fight, so they were just sitting there. We managed to escape to a small little town. I come from here, 90 miles southwest of Krakow, right around here. We managed to escape just a little bit northeast towards Przemyśl. It's not on this picture, on this map. And there, the first unit of German troops entered within a day. And they were very nice. I stood there, I watched them, I envied them. They were neatly uniformed, they were nice, they handed out cigarettes, candy, they were really nice. So my dad and a number of people from my hometown who managed to escape there decided to go back home, because we had left everything wide open. We just ran. We didn't have much with us. A shirt, a pair of shorts, that's about it. So he went back. But he told my mom that she and us children should stay in that town until he ascertains that it is peaceful in my hometown. And if it is peaceful, he will send for us to come back, to return. The day after he left, and the unit, the German military unit, moved eastward to meet with the Soviets, because no one knew that Hitler and Stalin, two arch enemies of one another, two dictators, decided to become friends and divide Poland into two. Hitler will keep the west part of Poland, and Soviet troops will march into the east part. So people try to escape eastward, hoping that once the Allies come to the assistance and start shooting, Hitler will be forced to retreat. But that was not to happen. So the SS unit enters the town and orders all Jewish males in that town between the ages of 16 and 60, in other words, healthy people, to show up immediately in the central square, to be registered, supposedly, and whoever is not going to show up, they are going to go from house to house. He will be shot on the spot. There was a commotion going on outside, crying, women crying as their husbands were already marching out to the central square, children crying. It was awful. When my mom heard all this, she told us to sit around the table in the kitchen where we were at. A glazier who used to buy glass from us allowed us to stay in his kitchen. He had a little house, a kitchen, and a bedroom. So he was in the bedroom with his son, who was my age, and we were in the kitchen, sleeping on the floor. My mom put us around the table and gave each one of us a book to read. The problem was that this grazier man was a very religious individual. He had no secular books to read. So she gave everyone a prayer book. So we were sitting there with a prayer book there, and all of a sudden, an SS man, big, tall guy, kicks the door open with his boot, his revolver in his outstretched arm, and he says, "All men rouse out to the square." And he looks at me, because I was the oldest. I was 16 years old. My mom, who used to go to German schools, because this was the Austro-Hungarian Empire where I came from before. So she went to German schools. She told him that I was 14 years old, that she was so sharp to immediately tell him I wasn't 16. I don't know. Had she told him the truth, I wouldn't be here today. The boy in the next room, he shoved out at 16 years, local boy, and they left. And we didn't know what happened in the central square because we weren't allowed to open the windows. But all we did was hear screaming and crying outside. Within minutes, we saw a huge fire coming from a certain direction where I knew that the Jewish house of worship was, the temple, the Jewish temple, that they probably put it to the torch. And that was true. And I hear again crying and screaming, and all of a sudden here and there a shot. But we didn't know what went on there. We found out the following morning that some of the religious Jewish people tried to get in to take out the Holy Bibles and the Torahs, which is the Bibles of parchment, the Old Testament, and apparently they locked the doors, and if they tried to get out, they shot them. Now, that was hearsay. I did not see it. All I saw was the fire. Well, we had an awful night. Of course, we couldn't sleep. But very early in the morning, there was a knock on the door. Well, the SS wasn't knocking on doors. They just kicked it open. So we knew it was somebody else. We opened the door, and there's that 16 years old local boy, all bloodied up, pale and crying, and describes what happened in the central square. Some 240 had indeed assembled there. Others were hidden, did not show up, but about 240 did show up. They were lined up, marched outside the square to a ravine, told them to line up along the ravine, and all of a sudden, they started machine gunning them, shooting them. This youngster passed out, fell into the ravine. The dead and the wounded fell on him. And when they were gone, and he came to, he worked his way out and came to tell us the story. It was unbelievable to me, a young teenager. How could Germans come in and just simply kill people, innocent people? We always kept Germans at a very high esteem. And here they are murderers. It's unbelievable. Well, within minutes, another man knocks on the door. And this is a man from my hometown, Mr. Shamrot. He had a bike store. And I knew him very well because I used to rent a bike. We didn't have bikes in my days. It was too expensive. But you went for a few pennies, you rented it for an hour. So I knew him very well. And he had a bullet wound in his chest. My mom put a towel around it, and he was in the same group. The 240-some that were shot. We found out much later that a number of whole families from my hometown were shot. But I asked a gentleman who called me from Jerusalem. And he said to me, "Do you remember me? That was just 2 years ago. You remember me?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I remember your family. Weinstein." I said, "Whatever happened to Ansel?" Because he was a friend of mine, and I never had seen him since that episode. He says, "Oh, he was shot in Dinov. He was shot with his entire family." So they were shot at the same time. Anyway, to make a long story short, we eventually made our way back home. We come back to my hometown, and we are taking off this little bundle that we had with us, and a man by the name of Palant, whom I knew, he was about 10 years older than I, comes over and he said, "The order is that all Jewish people must leave the town and go across the Sun River, which is about 20 miles to the east." It was then that we found out that the Soviets are going to be there. They are going to occupy that. So we put our bundles back on the wagon, and we are going to go east. When a Gestapo man, there was already Gestapo in my town, right across the street from our shop. We were in the glazing business, glass, beveling business, and so on. And a Gestapo man by the name of Oscar Becker, because I came to know every one of them afterwards. Oscar Becker comes down and he says to my dad, "Herr Glasermeister," which means Glazermaster, "you cannot go because we need you here." So Mr. Palant went, and a number of other Jewish people that were forced to leave and go east, they went, and we came and stayed. Anyway, I will make it brief thereafter. As you know, later in 1939, all the Nuremberg laws against Jewish people came into, became the law. We had to wear armbands with the Star of David. We couldn't go to the park. You couldn't sit on a bench, and you were severely restricted. And most people had to go to work and do slave labor for the Germans. The Gestapo was in charge of the Jewish people, not the city. But we were left relatively alone because Polish roads were not highways. These were dirt roads with potholes all over the place. So the Germans were highly motorized. They didn't have horses and wagons. They had tanks and cars and trucks. So they had lots of broken windows. Also, we had an air base in our town that was just completed in 1939. And I knew that air base very well because we glazed it. So I was there almost every day. It was a beautiful air base. The windows were all broken because the airbase had been bombed. The railroad station had been bombed. And we had to fix that. So we were very, very busy. So we were better off than any of the other Jewish, and not only Jewish, but even Christian people. Because dealing with German soldiers and officers almost just about every day, there was an advantage to us. First of all, the Gestapo didn't bother us. They had broken windows in their cars we fixed. That's how I came to know every one of them in our town. And here and there, they would give you a loaf of bread. They would give you a can of sardines because food was very hard to come by. Everything was rationed. And the rations for a working non-Jewish Pole was 800 to 1,200 calories a day. Now, how do you work with 800 and 1,200 calories? Jewish rations were 600 calories a day. There's no way you can survive on that. So there was black marketeering going on all over the place. People gave away all the things that they had, gold watches, bracelets, and so on, to get a piece of bread or some flowers and so on. The Polish peasant had to deliver all his products to Germans. And if he did not, he ended up in Auschwitz. Auschwitz was made into a concentration camp, but there were no Jews there, only Christian Poles who did not deliver to the Germans or were suspected of being in the underground against Germans and so on. They landed up there. There is, near my hometown, a memorial there where a Polish peasant did not deliver his pig to the Germans. He slaughtered it at home. There's the memorial. He was shot and the family were shot. It was awful. So there was shooting going on, but it was sporadic. If they caught you without the armband, or if they saw you in the park, or on a train, or in a bus, which you're not supposed to be, but have been, you were taken, simply shot. So there was sporadic killing here and there, but mass killing, no. And we survived. So 1939, 1940 came. Well, the British and the French still did not shoot. They were just sitting, the Germans on one side and the French and the British on the other side. So Hitler decided he was going to take care of them. So what does he do? You cannot march into France because there was a Maginot Line alongside the border. There was a Maginot Line all the way, which was an impenetrable line that an engineer by the name of Maginot built after World War I to prevent Germany to ever be able to break into France. But he had no problem. All he had to do is go north and go to Belgium here. March in this way and come this way down to Paris. And, of course, the others tried to resist, but it didn't work. If you had seen the movie Dunkirk, I remember that just like if it had been yesterday, where the German troops were all pushed the Allies all the way to Dunkirk. And I read lots of German newspapers because the soldiers used to leave all their newspapers and their radios were blaring. And there was a stormtrooper living above our shop from Berlin, and his radio was blaring continually. All kinds of martial music, reports, and so on. I can still repeat the military reports of almost every day. And so the Germans then attacked and took Paris, pushed the Allies to Dunkirk, and of course they had to leave all their heavy equipment. About close to 500,000 escaped, as you have seen in that movie, if you have seen that movie. You know, but the equipment they couldn't take with them. So they had to leave all this equipment. I saw it because whereas before I used to glaze DKWs, Opels, German cars, BMWs and Mercedeses, all of a sudden I see American cars and British cars. This was all stuff that the Germans got that the Allies had to leave in France. Anyway, that was 1940. Then came 1941. Early in 1941, we have noticed that something wasn't right. Masses of troops, German troops from the West, were moved to where our town is. Loads of them. Tanks, trucks going day and night. You couldn't sleep. We knew something is happening there. Hitler and Stalin were friends, kissing one another. All of a sudden, German troops are moving towards the demarcation line of German-occupied Poland and Soviet-occupied Poland. So we knew something is going to happen. We also saw graffiti, all kinds of graffiti against the Soviets, whereas before, all you hear over the radio was the Jews in London and Washington who declared war on Germany and all that sort of stuff. Moscow was never mentioned. All of a sudden we hear the Jews in Moscow, the Jews in London, the Jews in Washington are all after that poor Germany. So we knew something was happening there between them, and German troops were moving towards the demarcation line. Now, if you remember that June 22nd, 1941, German troops invaded the eastern half of Poland that Hitler so generously gave to Stalin. Now, I knew that for a few days before, because all of a sudden the airbase was extremely busy. Whereas before all we saw was just Junkers, such planes. All of a sudden we have Heinkels and all kinds of two-motor bombers and so on. So we knew that something was happening. And on that day, June 22nd, within hours, some German airmen from the airbase came to our shop and described how they bombed Lemberg, which is Lvov, which is now the capital of Western Ukraine, and how the Russians are running in their gachas, in their shorts, in the middle of the night when they were being bombed and so on. So we knew this happened. And within days, thousands, tens of thousands of Soviet prisoners of war were dragged back to near our area. 5,000 of them were settled in a hastily created camp, which was in a village near my hometown. The village's name was Shebnie. There were about 5,000 to 6,000 German prisoners of war. And if you listen to the German radio, which I heard every day, and read all the newspapers of theirs, the Germans were encircling whole armies. I was amazing. How could the Soviet Union just be able to survive? They were being taken in by the tens of thousands. In our place, the 5,000 to 6,000 Soviet prisoners of war, within a year, were taken out and shot. All of them. There are mass graves there where they were shot. And the camp was converted into a concentration camp, a sub-camp for Poles and Jews that they used later on. Yeah. So that was 1941. We also, within a few days of their attacking the eastern part of Poland, 3 of my cousins who managed to escape initially to the east and were under Soviets smuggled their way back to our town because they heard that in our town was quiet. There they described taking out Jewish people in all of the cities by the thousands, and now not anymore males between 16 and 60, but women, children, old people, all of them out and being shot. In the town where my cousins were called Stanisławów. It's now the eastern Ukraine. You see Lviv there, which is the capital of the Ukraine, and or just a little bit to the east is Stanisławów. And there, over 10,000 Jewish people, women, children, including my cousin's relatives that they stayed with, were shot and killed. Everywhere. It was unbelievable. But where we were, in the German-occupied part, it was still relatively quiet. Believe it or not, some people still had their stores open, Jewish people, if they could get replacement for the stuff that they were selling. But to the east of us, the massacres were going on just like that. Later in 1941, as you know, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, Japan was Hitler's friend. And now America entered the war. And they didn't realize that they woke up a sleeping lion, because America then mobilized very rapidly. Almost the entire fleet, Pacific American fleet, was knocked out at Pearl Harbor. It was a surprise attack, and America woke up and joined the war. 3 days later, Hitler declared war on the United States. It wasn't the United States declaring war on Hitler. Hitler declared war on the United States. And I remember the newspapers and the radios, oh, lambasting, they won the war already now, etc., because by now, 1941, they not only had the entire West, but they had also marched north, all the way Denmark, Norway, all the way almost to the North Pole, and marched south to the Aegean, all the way to Zagreb, which is Croatia, here Slovenia with Ljubljana, all the way down the Aegean Peninsula to Greece, Albania, and also landed in Crete. And Mussolini, who was the fascist leader of Italy, seeing that Hitler is winning the war, he has got all of Europe, decided he wants a piece of the action. So he joined Hitler. And he had occupied the North African coast. The French had a little piece there, but the Italians had the rest. So Hitler sent the Afrika Korps, Germans there, to support the British against the, to support the Germans against the British who were attacking them from Egypt. Hitler thought he had won the war now. Now they had won the war, came Christmas 1941. A few days before Christmas 1941, the Jewish community was called into the Gestapo, some representatives. My dad was amongst them. They were given the order that all the Jews have to deliver all their woolens and all their furs to one place, and if they would be caught with anything made out of wool or of fur, it's going to be shot on the spot. Wouldn't deliver it. I remember that evening very well. It was an evening. I saw my father go up to the Gestapo because the Gestapo was across from our shop. So I could see what goes on there through the window. And they were given that order. Now, mind you, that by the first week of December, German troops were already in the outskirts of Moscow. He thought they had already won the war. Anyway, my father came down and told us of that order. So we scrambled to get every piece of fur, woolen stockings with the holes, the whole business, and delivered it all. We were afraid someone's going to get killed. And I remember my dad told us that he overheard a Gestapo man from a neighboring town tell the chief of Gestapo in our town, whose name was Hauptsturmführer Schmatzler, telling Schmatzler in German, knallen Sie einige weg. That means, why don't you knock a few off? And indeed, the following day, they shot about a dozen Jewish people with the excuse they found on them a glove or a shawl or something made of wool. So this was my second experience of killing completely innocent people. That was Christmas time, December 1941. Now, around that time, my sister came home and told us that she had heard rumors of Jews being packed into hermetically sealed vans and carbon monoxide gases, exhaust gases, being driven in those vans. The people were being killed in those vans, and they were transporting the victims to the cemetery where they had prepared mass graves and threw them in those mass graves. I remember she came with that news. I didn't believe it. I said, no way, Germans can't do that. No. But that is true. But they didn't have enough of the vans. It was too slow a death. So then came January of 1941. You haven't heard about the Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee is a lake, a beautiful lake in Berlin. If you're ever in Berlin, you should go and visit that place. It's gorgeous. At the Wannsee Conference, in one of the houses that was owned by Jewish people, the Gestapo, the SS, set up a conference. They invited guests from the different departments, from the Treasury Department, from the military, from the SS, and so on, and decided that now is the time to kill all Jews. And that is when the Holocaust started. Holocaust. Holo means all. Caust is like caustic something, burning, destruction of an entire people. The Holocaust officially started January 1942. And we heard that they had built gas chambers, stationary, not anymore the vans, because that was too expensive. They didn't have enough of them. So they built stationary gas chambers where they would transport the people there and just simply poison them. I again didn't believe it. I remember these were just rumors. We couldn't travel. We couldn't communicate, so we didn't know. And the German soldiers that used to come and officers to our place didn't know that. They didn't tell us that, if they knew it even. So we didn't know. But we then heard about the ghettos in Krakow, in the big cities, and Warsaw, and the transportation of people away to the gas chambers. It came to our town in August of 1942, where we were ordered, all Jewish people, regardless of age or gender, must show up near the railroad station, where there was a big cattle market called Targovica, for so-called resettlement. That was the name for being sent to the gas chambers, because they are going to be resettled to work somewhere in the east. Well, we didn't know what to do. I'm not going to go into details because my time is limited here. I and Mr. Heller, who was a relative of ours and worked in our shop, took some tools and went to see Schmutzler, the head of the Gestapo, to find out whether that order applies to us as well, because we still have some work to do for the military. I remember that, but I want the right details. he told us that you have to show up there, but you are going to go back and stay in that little street which is made into a ghetto. But we didn't believe him, so we hid my mom, my sister, and my little brother, because we knew that they are the most vulnerable ones. Because now, in 1942, they were in the third year of the war. All men, Germans, were in the front. And they were struggling near Stalingrad, all the way near the Ural Mountains. They were already there. So they needed workers. So the healthy ones, those between 16 and 60, that they before killed, now they wanted to preserve. And only women and children and older people they couldn't use for slave labor, sent to the gas chambers. So that order came. We marched out there. Mr. Heller hid his wife, Rachel, and two little babies that he had. We hid them in the attic. And we went out there. To describe this scene is simply impossible. I would have to be here all day to describe this scene of people marching out there, the crying, the saying goodbye, the babies, and women, older people being pushed in wheelbarrows, other ulcers being carried on their shoulders, and people with prosthesis barely going out to the train station. We went there. We go there, and we see the place surrounded with machine guns, with SS machine guns. And we walked in. They told us to line up with all the others. And the weak, the ones that didn't look like they are suitable for slave labor, had to go all in one corner. And we could see, because the people who had prosthesis, people who came with canes, and the people who were pushed in the wheelbarrows, all of them were ordered to be in that corner there. To make a long story short, a number of trucks arrived. They forced these people on the trucks, and where daughters or sons tried to go with their parents, they didn't want their parents to go by themselves. They were beaten horribly to get back in line. Horribly, and I won't describe the scenes. We were standing in line. The Gestapo came over from our town. That guy's name was not Becker, was not Schmatzler, but was a different guy. And he told us that we are going back home into that little ghetto, but not to our home, but to a little street, the Franciscan street, because the Franciscan church was there. And it happened so that my uncle's house was next to the Franciscan church. And my uncle was now, since he managed to escape east, was now in Siberia. The Soviets took those from the west that managed to escape to the east and took him to Siberia. So he was there. So we went, grabbed his apartment, and my relatives, each one got a room in that apartment. That was the ghetto. So we came back home. Now what happened to the rest? Those that were in the corner were driven off, and we found out the following day that they were all shot and killed and buried. I have photos of those mass graves. I found that out from a maid that worked for the stone trooper who lived above our shop. When she told me he came home totally drunk and described how a neighbor, Mr. Reeder, who was a hat maker, and he lived downstairs, was being marched in to the mass grave to be shot, and he held the prayer book with him and the prayer shawl and was praying. So we knew that they were all shot. What happened to the rest? Those were put on the train after midnight and taken to Belzec extermination camp. Belzec was the closest to our town. It was near Lublin. Lublin is not here, but it is just around here. If here was my town, Lublin is around here. And they were taken there, and Belzec, there were about 600,000 Jewish people were killed. There were no survivors. One individual, Mr. Hirschman, hid in the crap of the latrine. He survived, and he testified after the war. The only survivor out of about 600,000. My uncles, cousins of mine, all of them killed there. Now, that was August 1942. A few weeks later, I was out of town. I was sent to work in a refinery in a neighboring small town. And when I came back home, I found my dad sitting and crying and tearing his hair out. And a cousin of mine, who was a tool and die maker, mechanic, worked also for the Germans, and he was sent back from that place of the assembly to the ghetto, was standing and cheering him up. And I didn't see my mom, and I didn't see my sister. And I found out that the Gestapo announced that those that were hidden, if they would voluntarily show up, they are going to be given permission to stay. And apparently my mom, my sister went out, but instead of being given permission, over 100 of them that were hidden were loaded on trucks and taken away. And no one knew where to. I was absolutely hysterical, crying. I wanted to hit my father. How could he have left them out without me being there? He shouldn't have let them out. But it was done. My job now was to find out what happened to them. How am I going to find out? I went to see the stormtrooper the following morning, and I told him Mr. Pace, his name was Pace, P-A-E-S, and he was a dispatcher of trucks. So I knew that he knows what happened to them, because the trucks he had to deliver to take these people away. And he is the one whose mate told me he came home drunk, having seen the neighbor being shot during the first resettlement action. So I knew he knows. So I went to him. And he said to me, well, you should have come to me yesterday. I would have told you that the Gestapo had ordered trucks. But now it's too late. So these were the first victims of my own family, my mother and my sister. Now, Mr. Heller's wife was in the same transport. And I found out, not immediately, from my cousin, the tool die maker. I found out not until after the war that his wife, Rachel, with the two babies, Rachel, was there too. But the truck blew a tire. So they all had to get off the truck. And while they were off there, my mom went over to Schmatzler. He was there. and told him, I am the Glasermeister's wife. Schmatzler was in our shop very frequently. My mom offered him tea. You could talk to him. He apparently hit her in the face, and he told her to stay there. And while this was going on, Rachel, Mr. Heller's wife, slipped away, and there were peasants going into town, and she joined them, and she came back. And she was back. But I didn't know that. I found that out after the war. They didn't want to tell me that. Anyway, things were not the same. We went back to the shop. The shop was owned by an ethnic German, a nice man. We worked for him. Then came December 1942. The 3rd of December was a Thursday. And the order in the afternoon came from the Gestapo that the town is going to be what is called the Judenrein in German, which means free of Jews. Everybody is going to be so-called resettled. And everyone must show up the following morning on the street of the ghetto to be resettled and take along all your valuables, because you are not going to come back again, but you're going to work in the East, supposedly. We knew what resettlement meant. It meant to be killed in the gas chambers. So we went into hiding. In our shop, there was a cellar. So we slipped out of the ghetto, went into that cellar, and there I was, my father, Mr. Heller, and Rachel Heller, his wife, who I didn't know had escaped before, with her 2 babies. We were there. My younger brother was sent to a neighboring town to clean up after the victims there and ship their belongings to Germany. So he wasn't there. We were there all night. What are we going to do? What's going to happen? So early in the morning, Mr. Heller said he's going to take some tools and some glass as if going to work. And he's going to see what's going on around the ghetto street. Ours is a small town. You know, you just walk out, you're right there. So he walks out and comes right back. He said the ghetto street is surrounded with machine guns, very much like before. We didn't know what to do. We thought we will wait until the ethnic German comes and opens the shop. So we sat in that cellar in the winter with the 2 babies, and we hear him open the shop at 8. So we crawl out of that basement, and he looks at us and he wonders, what are you guys doing here with babies in the winter? So we told him. So he said, look, you can't stay here, but I will go into the ghetto and find out whether you are going to stay in town. He goes into the ghetto, comes back with Mr. Becker, the Gestapo man. And the Gestapo man says, follow me into the ghetto. We followed him, came into the ghetto. There were already people lined up, all of them 300 some were there, who used to work at the airbase. And they used to work for a Kirchhoff company that was building roads, a German company. Everyone was lined up already. Whoever came after us was shot right there, right on the street, right in front of me. And I stood there with my little brother, my dad next to me, and Mr. Heller, and a cousin of mine, the tool and die maker, with his little boy, Michael, who was hidden before with the first resettlement. So Now, Schmatzler, the chief of the Gestapo, comes over to us and he tells that my father and I and Mr. Heller and David are going to go to the air base and work for the German Luftwaffe, for the German Air Force. We will stay in town because the air base was just, about 2 miles away. So, but they wouldn't allow my little brother to go with me, and they wouldn't allow my cousin's little boy to go with him. So my cousin told my father, because the Gestapo chief said, I promise you, Herr Glasermeister, that they are not going to go up there. They are going to go to a larger ghetto in Rzeszów, which is just 50 kilometers north of my hometown. And that's where they're going to be. And since you are going to be at the air base, you will be able to communicate with them and help them out and whatever not. Well, pleading with him did not work. We pleaded with him to let my little brother go with us. He can work and this and that. By that time, my little brother was 11 years old. Anyway, David said to my dad, he will take my little brother and his little boy so that they will be able to play together, and he will take care of them. And they marched all the people out of there. They marched them out. I cannot describe to you the crying that went on. Within minutes, a Gestapo man from a different town, whom I also knew by name, Mr. Hauch, brings back Rachel, the 2 babies in her arm. He has a stand here, takes his revolver, shoots the 2 babies and the mother, just a few yards away from where I stood. It was unbelievable. Simply unbelievable. But that's what happened. We were sent to the air base. We were there the entire year of 1943. And I must credit the administration at the air base that they treated us humanely. And although our provisions had to come from Szczebnie, from that concentration camp, we didn't eat that stuff. Because working at the air base, we had access to different things. My father worked in the airman's kitchen. I got very sick there. So I was stuporous, I was very sick. And the sergeant, I remember him so well, who was in charge of the airman's kitchen, a redhead German sergeant, found out that I was sick. So he gave my father food to bring to the barrack. You know, we were guarded there, but not by the SS, but by just guards. And so we, although we were hungry, we had sufficient food to survive. I was there the entire 43, and in the end of 43, we were shipped out to Krakow, Płaszów via Szczebnie. We went to the Szczebnie first, cleaned up after them because they took out a few thousand people there and they shot them all. And some of them were sent to Auschwitz. And we were sent there to clean up after them, to Krakow, Płaszów. And there I was, there I lost my dad and Mr. Heller during a selection. They were taken away to Auschwitz. And where they were taken away, and I was supposed to stay, my dad turned to me, and he knew where he was going. And he said to me, I know where I'm going. He tried to give me his little piece of bread that he had. I didn't want to take it. And he said, I won't need it anymore. And I don't care to live anymore. Because if I live another 10 years, all I will be doing is consuming another ton of potatoes. But if you survive, and I pray to God that you survive, I have one single request, and that is be a mensch. That means be a decent human being. That was his last message to me. They took him away and Mr. Heller, and they were killed the very same day in Auschwitz, because Auschwitz was not even an hour away from Krakow, Plaszow. Then came October. I was ordered out to open mass graves, because the Soviets were now coming close to Krakow. So the SS decided to open the mass graves and burn the corpses to completely mask what they did. So I was in that mass grave. You may have seen it if you have seen the movie Schindler's List. I was in that mass grave, digging up the corpses. I got my nose broken there when a capo didn't like the way I was trying to dig up corpses. I won't describe the details and so on and so on, but I survived. And then the 15th of October, I was selected to go to Sudetenland, which was Germany then, to Mr. Schindler's camp. If you had seen the movie Schindler's List, you will know who the Mr. Schindler was, and that's where I survived the war. And now I had to rise from the ashes of the Holocaust, and if I wanted to survive, and make a life for myself. And I'm not going to describe that in detail, except I want to tell you the 3 lessons that I have learned that I want to convey to you. Number 1, indifference was the most important, simple thing that allowed something like this to happen. And you should not remain indifferent if you see a segment of the population, either because they look different, or they behave different, or they are of a different religion, and so on. You have to stand up for human rights. Number 2, be a mensch. Be a decent human being. That goes for students. Don't paint graffiti in people's houses. Don't throw garbage on the streets. Don't join skinheads and neo-Nazis and other such organizations. Don't get involved in dope. Be a decent, good, charitable, kind human being. Tolerant. And the last thing is don't stop studying. I was so hungry after I was liberated May 8th, 1945. I would have given an arm and a leg to study. Where? Well, I'm not going to describe the story because it's too long of a story, how I got to the American zone of occupation in Germany. And there were all kinds of charitable organizations. There were Quakers, there were Catholic organizations, Protestant evangelicals, all kinds. And there was UNRWA, the United Nations, and they had an education department. The medical school was not yet open, but an architectural school, which was outside the city of Munich, that hadn't been bombed very much, was opened. I signed up for that. I needed an education no matter what it was. But then I found out the medical school is going to open in about 2 weeks. So I signed up, I graduated, I came here. I served during the Korean War in the medical corps, was stationed right here at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, if you know where that is. If you were in the Army, you know where Fort Leonard Wood is. And then continued, got married, and children, and so on and so on. And that's the end of my story. I'm going to quit now. Les gave me a signal I'm beyond my time. So if you have any questions, ask me. But I'm going to sit down a 95 years old man. My two legs feel like two trunks of a tree. So I will sit down and I will answer your questions. Thank you. One second.
So my question is, when you first got into the States, did you experience any type of discrimination or any, what's the word I'm looking for, any type of oppression when you did get to the States? We'll just wait a moment. If people want to come up and fill up some of the seats, you can. The question
And
is,
speak loud.
okay. The question is, when you came to the States, you came in 1950. When you came to the States, did you experience any discrimination?
Okay. Anti-Semitism is prevalent everywhere. And in my days, it was more prevalent than it is now. It was everywhere, not just in Poland. As a matter of fact, it may surprise you that Germany had the least. In Germany, anti-Semitism came from the top, from the government, from Hitler's Nazi government down. The average German didn't know a Jew from beans. Why? Because there were only 400,000 Jews among 65 million. They comprised barely 1% of the population. But they were prominent because they were educated. They were prominent in all aspects of life. In Poland, Jews were very poor. There were here and there a rich Jew, and most of them were poor. Okay. So it was there. I came to America, but I was now in a free country, right? So if Joe didn't like me, I told him to go to hell. You couldn't do that when I was a kid in Poland. If I said something, I got beaten up. You see, here, I don't get beaten up. You don't like me? I don't like you. I couldn't care less whether you like me or not. But did I experience it? Yes. Just to give you one example, I wanted to live in a wooded area on the south side, Olympia Fields. And there was a country club that was discriminating. It wouldn't take Jews or blacks or like that. I'm not a country clubber, so I wasn't the slightest interest in being there. But I had many patients that were members of the club, and I ate there quite often, there. But I couldn't be a member. Anyway, we had a driveway that was a one-way, and I wanted the driveway to be circular so I can get out, but there was a huge tree there, a huge Eicher tree. I didn't want to cut it down. So I petitioned the country club to allow me 3 feet so I won't have to cut the tree. They did to a physician, Dr. Pascal, you have known. They gave him, they sold him a little piece of it. They wouldn't sell it to me. And I heard from some of my patients, they said, he called the Jew lawyer. Because I called up my father, and he said, why, call up a lawyer. So I called up a lawyer. Of course, I called up the Jew lawyer. So there you have anti-Semitism. But in America, I don't care. That's it. Whether he likes you. He can't be liked by everybody. I don't know whether that answers your question. And now, if you ask me, is there still anti-Semitism? Oh, I'm sure there is. But I know if someone does anything to me, I can go to court. And the guy will go to jail or will pay a few $1 million.
Oh. Anybody else?
How did you deal with the trauma following the war?
How did you deal with the trauma after the war?
Okay. Right after the war, there were many suicides because survivors didn't know how to get back on their feet, and they lost faith in humanity. I wasn't going to allow to do that. Hitler wanted me dead, and I wasn't going to die no matter what. I'm going to live. I'm going to make a life for myself. And I just shoved that past back into my subconscious on the heap there, and I wouldn't allow that to interfere with my future. It's there all the time, every minute of the day. At a wedding, at a party, it's there all the time. But I don't allow that to interfere with my life, because that is a God-given gift to me, and I'm not going to get rid of it until I'm called up.
Other people. Okay. Whatever happened to the Gestapo people in your town, like Schmalzen?
Okay. I was very curious to know. At the air base, there was a captain. His name was Captain Herzl, a most wonderful man who used to come to the barrack and tell us how Hamburg was bombed. And I remember when he told us that, he said, you know why this is happening to us? Because what we are doing to you, that's God's punishment. I'll never forget him. And I always thought I should go and find him. He was from Frankfurt somewhere. But I didn't have enough time because I had to study. I didn't have time. Again, what was the question again? I lost the thought.
What happened to the people?
Oh, yeah.
Gestapo?
Okay. So I inquired. There's a lady in Rzeszów. Les, I hope you will see her when you are there this time, who is a professor of history at the university in Rzeszów. And she is concerned with the history of the Jewish people in Galicia. Galicia, the southern part of Poland, you see where Krakow is, all the way to the east. That used to, the Austrians called it Galicia when they occupied it. And she wrote the history of the Jews in Galicia. So I asked her whether they have records of it. She says yes, and she sent it to me. Mr. Becker was sentenced to life in prison in Germany. Schmatzler, I know what happened. Schmatzler was executed in Poland. Schmutzler wanted to show that he is a great patriotic Nazi. So he stayed in town while the Soviets were already coming close. So the Poles grabbed him. They grabbed him, and they grabbed another guy that people used to call the Schwitzer because he was sweating. He was always going all over the place, and he was in the administration. But he was a nice man. He always bowed, he said hello. He never bothered anybody. So the Poles grabbed the Schwitzer and grabbed Schmutzler. The Schwitzers are let go back home. But Schmutzler, they took to court. Now, I managed to get back to Poland for a week, where they were having him in court. But they had him not for killing Jews. They had him because there was a countess who had a big estate, and she reported her husband. She didn't get along with the husband to the Gestapo, and the husband was sent to Auschwitz and was killed over there. Now, I remember that woman because she used to buy glass from us. I remember in the winter she would wear a big fur coat all the way down here, and I remember during the war I saw her every so often go up to the Gestapo. And I was wondering, what was she doing at the Gestapo so often? I found out during that court proceedings. I don't know whatever happened to her, but Schmutzler was hanged. And I was in Przemyśl, where he was taken to be executed. The others, Stengler, I don't know what happened. Von der Veer, I also don't know what happened. They didn't know in Rzeszów. I asked them.
His mother and sister?
You want to ask?
Have you ever found out what happened to your mother and sister?
What my mother and sister,
were her
yeah,
mother and
no, they were taken away. And I found out from the stormtrooper that I came too late. And there are so many mass graves in our area that I found out from Elżbieta Rącze. That's the professor who wrote books on this subject. And she's professor of history, and that's her interest. And she took me to a number of places, and I interviewed peasants. But one peasant who is right nearby, without teeth, and he told me he was only 12 years old at the time, but he remembers how they were bringing him there and shooting him there. And I have photos of that place, but there are also Christians that were shot there. So there are crosses all over the place, and there are mass graves for Jews. Which mass grave she's in, I don't know. And whether this is even the mass grave, I don't know, because there are mass graves in all kinds of towns and villages and the forests where they took him to be shot.
Okay, anyone else?
So you using the word indifference got me thinking a lot about whether we're indifferent now in the United States. And I wonder if you can think of any warnings we should have towards our indifference.
Okay. People ask me that question. What about Trump? Isn't it something like Hitler in the 30s? My answer to that is neither Trump nor Putin are Hitler or Stalin. Remember that. Neither. Okay. And Americans are not Germans that listen to the boss. They have to have a Führer, a leader. You know, he tells them what to do, and they don't ask questions. A German, if you tell him to shoot his mother, he will shoot his mother because that's the order. An American isn't going to do that because America has a tradition, a history, has a constitution. Germany also had a constitution very much like the American Constitution, but Hitler tore it up and threw it in the garbage. You try to change the Constitution in America, no way. So they have to abide by it. So I am not concerned. I know Les is concerned about it, but he's a liberal. And I am neutral. I'm neither one or the other. I think this nation survived many things that survived Trump and anyone else. And he is not Hitler, nor Stalin. No one asked what happened to the people that managed to escape to the east. Let me tell you about it, because a friend of mine, by the way, if you have the flash drive to your computer, his son invented it and sold for $1.4 billion, his son. And he went to school with me, this guy. And when I visited him in Israel, by the way, he was a Zionist, always. And in Siberia, he was taken to Siberia. They put him in jail there. And then when he came back to Poland, was a communist government, he was in jail there for a year because he was a Zionist, and that wasn't kosher to be. Anyway, he told me his mother wrote a diary of them being dragged to Siberia. Those people who came from the western half of Poland, like my hometown, and managed to escape, Stalin didn't trust them. So he shipped them to Siberia. And it wasn't just going on a nice train ride, Trans-Siberian Railroad, but it was on foot, on horses, on boats that were rickety, they were tilting over, and all kinds of things. And this woman, his mother, wrote it in Polish. And there was no paper to write, but communist papers you could get. So she wrote it on strips of edges of the newspapers, and she brought it back to Poland. And her son gave it to the museum Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and they have it there on the glass there. So, and he abstracted it, but it was in Polish. So I told him, I said, Bunek, can you give it to me? I would like to translate it in English, you know. So he gave it to me. So I tried to translate it verbatim, word by word, because I was afraid if I'm going to make it proper English, by the way, I'm not a language expert. I never attended a school, a language school in English. I learned on the job. But I will try to translate it just the way it is written in Polish, which doesn't come out very well, but you get the idea. And I showed it to a friend of mine who is a retired colonel in the army here. And he heard me want to speak to, I spoke to about 800 veterans. And he became friends of mine. And he told me he wants to make it in a book. Okay? So he made it into this, Surviving the Holocaust in Siberia. Now that is a Holocaust story, an aspect of the Holocaust that very few people know about. Everybody knows Auschwitz and Majdanek and Treblinka and Sobibor, where people were killed by the hundreds of thousands. But no one knows the suffering that they suffered on the way there, and while they were there and back. And this friend of mine told me that about a third of them died in Siberia, not because they were shot. The conditions that were there, no food, night blindness, and so on. And I had an uncle and cousins who were dragged there, and they told me that story when they came back after the war. They all said the same thing. My uncle was thrown in jail. He was in jail for about a week because when summer started, the things started growing. So they put in some what called marchewki in Polish. No, the yellow things, yellow. Huh? Yeah, to grow. He stole 2 of those because he was blind. He couldn't see. There was no vitamin A. There was no vitamin D. You see, so they had night blindness. He told me the story. One of my cousins, who was an electromechanic in Siberia, was put into to work in the electrical plant to supply electricity to the camp. So one day, the NKVD, which is the Secret Service chief of the camp, called him in and he said, I hear people are complaining about the food. And I said, I want you to give me a list who the complainants are. So he said, no one is complaining. We're all very happy. We get very good food. What was the food? A barrel full of water. It was a soup. There were no veggies. There was no fruit. Now, but in the summer, you could go into, because all forests there. Forests, lakes, and rivers. That's all you see. And snow. You could pick wild strawberries and so on. So they had some of that, but otherwise nothing. So he said many people were blind. They couldn't see. So he didn't give him the list. He said, nobody is complaining. Everyone is very happy here. So they gave him a chance, a second chance. Still, he didn't come up with a list. So they took him out of the electricity plant and they put an Uzbek in there to run it. And they put into the forest to cut trees. But he is very handy. So he took some wire and made traps to trap animals. And he trapped 2 rabbits, those big rabbits, big rabbits. He wrapped it around his belly, brought it to the camp. He said by the time he brought it in, this was all frozen. It was just all ice. But the cook, he told the cook, I'll tell you what, I will give you 1 rabbit. You will make 1 rabbit for me, but you have to promise me the livers have to be given to the people that are blind. Okay, which he did. The cook did that. He said, it's amazing how overnight they could see. It was absolutely amazing. And that is an aspect of the Holocaust that very few people know about. There is no movie about it. So if you want to make a movie out of it, you can have it. If you want to go and sell the book, fine. You don't have to pay me anything.
Are there any questions? We had one question where after the war, the Russians release the people from Cebu
Did they do what?
Did they release?
Yes, because the Polish government in exile, Władysław Sikorski was the Polish president in exile in Great Britain. And Churchill forced Poland to relinquish the eastern part of Poland to the Soviets. They didn't want to do that. And make a deal with Stalin to release Polish citizens. Now, Stalin was suffering at Stalingrad at the time, and he needed some help from the West and from the United States. You see, the United States supplied everything to them through not the island, through the things of Canyon and Kola, all the way in the north, and supplied the Russians with trucks. That's what I saw when I came to Poland for that week or two. All Studebakers, believe it or not. The Russian trucks that were worth a death. They were back from World War I. They were Studebakers. And they had American canned foods. The soldiers, the German soldiers. So you see, America supplied all that to them. So they allowed, Stalin allowed to form a Polish army to fight on the side with the Soviets. And they appointed a Polish communist to be the head of it. And a friend of mine who just died a few years ago, he studied with me in Munich, and he was a lieutenant in that army. And he told me he joined it because he wanted to get out of Siberia. He didn't want to be in the army and go to the front, but the front was better than being in Siberia. See? So that's how it was. So he allowed them to leave, and that's when they went to Tashkent and Samarkand, because in Tashkent, Samarkand, it was warm, and according to the agreement between Sikorski and Stalin, they can go wherever they want. So they went south, and then as soon as the war had ended, they came back to Poland, and Poland wanted them all to settle, and that part of Poland, which had been German, that was now given to Poland. So they were there for about a year, and then everybody ran away from there. They went to the U.S., to Australia. So I had cousins in Australia who had been in Siberia. I had cousins and my uncle in Israel who were in Siberia and had been in jail there. You couldn't say a word. If you didn't like the food, 5 years. It was amazing. There was a medical student who told me the story how he attended once a court proceeding. There were the communist guys sitting there, and everything was 5, 10, 15, 20. There was nothing in between. Okay, my little brother and my cousin, I never found out. And I inquired back and forth what happened. They were in Rzeszów, in that ghetto, and they were there. And sometime after Stalingrad, which was 1943, early February 1943, at that time, they started taking away the children. And since my cousin had his little boy and my brother, my cousin wouldn't let them go by themselves. Even so, he was a mechanic, and he could have been saved. You know. So probably they were killed and either shot or sent to Majdanek, which is near Lublin. That's where people from Rzeszów were sent to, Majdanek. My brother that was 2 years younger, I didn't know either. And there was a girl from a village near my hometown, Frida Frankel. She was with me at Schindler's Camp. And I knew that she knows what happened to my brother because she was a member of about 24 young people, boys and girls, who were cleaning up that neighboring ghetto and shipping the stuff to Germany. So I knew she must know, but she never wanted to tell me. Not until about 40-some years later, I went to New York. Ines isn't here, my wife isn't here, with my wife, and I invited her to come to the Waldorf Astoria for lunch. And I approached her, and I said to her, unless you knew her, Frida. I approached her and said, Frida, I know you know what happened to my brother, and I'm not going to let you go until you tell me. So she told me. There were 24 of them cleaning up in that little ghetto in a building guarded by the SS. My brother, since he knew glazing, you know, had permission to go and glaze in the jail there. So she told me that he apparently tried to throw in a postcard into a mailbox to us. We had a deal with a certain peasant near my hometown who used to hold glass for us, that whoever in the family is going to be wherever, to try to get a postcard to him, and he will bring it to us at the airbase, because he was hauling sand to the airbase. And all of a sudden, we didn't receive any note from him at all, nor from an uncle of mine who we knew was in the munitions factory in Skarżysko, and also threw a card in, and he used to bring us to the airbase. So after Stalingrad, we didn't hear anymore. I knew something horrible had happened. She told me that one morning, the SS, the Gestapo, ordered them to stand in a circle, and my brother stood next to her. When the Gestapo man called them out of the circle, she said, and my brother got very pale. You know, he knew something was going to happen. And the Gestapo man took his revolver and shot him right there. And he said to the rest, that's what's going to happen to you if you try to communicate with the outside. And I found that out, 20 years ago or somewhere. I didn't know before.
Any other questions?
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. And I hope that you take home the message, because it is important to remember. Because if you don't remember, you forget. And human beings forget. Make sure you tell it to your kids and your grandkids. Because I bet you 50 years from now, there will be all kinds of books. This never happened. That is American propaganda. That's why General Eisenhower told all the soldiers when they entered Buchenwald concentration camp, if you have a camera, please take pictures, because some son of a bitch is going to come in the future. He said it's all American propaganda. There were 50,000 corpses lying there that didn't manage to bury yet. And in Bergen-Belsen, the British did the same. Over 30,000 corpses were there that didn't manage to burn. And you can see it because it was just released a few years ago from the Imperial Museum in London. The British didn't want to release that film for all these years because they needed Germany for the Cold War with the Soviets. But the head decided it's time to release it. And they released that film. And it shows as they enter Bergen-Belsen, and what do you call these Scotch with the play of these things? What? Yeah, bagpipes. They're marching through their town, playing, and there are beautiful homes and beautiful gardens. Then they come as they march, they see a fence. And with people half dead and half alive standing at the fence. And they can't figure out how is it possible that on one side these beautiful little homes with healthy people, and here skeletons. And they march in. There was a pile of, and I saw in that movie, the sergeant stands there, says, I am Sergeant so-and-so, and so on. Take a look at these corpses. How many do you think are here? 2,000? No. 5,000? No. Over 30,000 lying there. He said, no one will believe it. The major who was the head of the unit ordered all the people in Bergen-Belsen to come out and pick up the corpses and burn them and bury them. And you can see it in that movie. The who was doing it? That famous guy, movie maker. Less that you like, Mom. Who was it?
Oh, it was Alfred Hitchcock.
Dr. Hitchcock. Well, Alfred Hitchcock volunteered to take these tapes and make it into the movie. You can see it. I'm sure if you go to Google and you ask Alfred Hitchcock's movie of Bergen-Belsen, you'll see it.
And I guess the last question is, do you know what number you are on Schindler's List?
200, I believe, 67. I think so, but it could be 268.
I think
You can find it in my book.
I think it's 270.
What?
270.
No, I think 270 isn't right.
Okay, on that note, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have my bag there. The bottle I will give you. I don't know something which is less here. Can you make a diagnosis right here? Something is wrong here. They may be allergic to some contact. That's okay. Let me give you this.
Okie dokie.
Okay, well, thank you
It was an honor and pleasure hearing your story.
Dan, this is Joe. This is one of the teachers I work with.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I'm the geography professor here, so I enjoyed thinking about the paths.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you hope it will never happen again.
Yeah.
Tomorrow at 5:30. Well, I think we're making streaming. So
Kathy?
check H4 Washington website. If not, something to
John, you can come around. We'll go to the